but I have it right here.
Let me go look. Maybe I made an egregious grading error. Okay, yeah, let's look at the last one before I come back there. It has some UML. We're going to write a class based on it. Maybe I should have made this like in boldface. Add a public accessor and mutator for the amount member variable. There was a typo here where I had the word amount here rather than X, but people figured that out. I actually wanted that to be up on the constructor. Doesn't matter, right? As long as you had a constructor, that looked good. So let's make a class for it. Class, the name of the class is money. What is the data variable called? Amount, and it should be a what?
Double.
It's a double, and what's its access? So private double amount. Now we need two constructors. One, a so-called default constructor. That's not actually what it is, but it's a parameterless constructor. It replaces the default constructor. So it's got to be public because it's got a plus sign in front of it. And constructors ought to be public anyways. Money doesn't do anything. The next one is going to do something. Public money, it takes a variable, whether you call the variable X or amount or whatever, it doesn't matter. This dot amount equals amount or amount equals X. And then we had a couple of methods, and we had a getter and a setter. May as well do the getter and setter while I'm thinking about it. So since the variable is called amount, public double get amount. And all it needs to do is return this dot amount. You can leave this keyword off if you want.
So for the exam, you said also add a public accessor and a mutator, so I just use those names directly.
Right, right. And did I make comment on the fact that you use those names?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. But as long as you did them both, I wanted you to get a lot of credit for it. So let me come back and look. So, yeah, since I say accessor and mutator, those are just the Latin terms for the functions. They're not the names of the functions. Because what if we had a lot of different pieces of data and not just amount? You would need a get amount and a get value and a get, locale and get currency, whatever. So, and then public void set amount. You could take an X or whatever. If we set this dot amount equal to X. And again, this keyword is not necessary because we don't have name confusion. If I'd called it amount, double amount, then I would have to use this. This dot amount is equal to amount. All right, and then we had a deposit or add. Yeah, deposit and remove. What types were they? Void, okay. So deposit took an X. And so this amount plus equals X. And then we're going to add a remove. That seems like the wrong term. Debit. All right, so double X amount minus equals X. However you wanted to word it, right? All right, so that would fill the demands of the UML. I don't know why I missed one of them, because I said that.
I have an accessor and a mutator.
Okay, you got them both. All right, so you need to get more credit.
Yeah, so I only called it accessor because
I understand why you did that, but yeah, I want you to get majority credit. Right. That's in the UML. Maybe I'm not understanding your question. Let me bring the UML back up. Like that. So I have a deposit and a remove, and I have those methods as well. See, right there, public deposit, public remove.
But you don't public money double amount. You got money amount double. You see that?
first one. This one goes to that one,
Yeah, I got it
and that
too.
one goes to that one.
I think
And you got that one actually, see? Except you called it double.
yeah, double X, but you got double.
Right, because one is, this one is a constructor, which takes a value. It's called a parameterized constructor. This one doesn't take any parameters, so it doesn't do anything, but this one has a parameter, so it can set this variable equal to what they pass in.
So X
And X and amount would
is
work
the
just fine.
amount, right? So my X
Okay,
here is
X.
the amount.
Correct, right.
So while you minus amount right here and you minus X, so it means that amount minus amount.
Right. If you wrote it exactly like this, I should have called this X. And what you're seeing is an edited version of it. So you're right, there is a difference between what you're seeing and what you've got here. So your remove method should look like amount minus equals X. That's fine, except this really should be X there. But I didn't count you off for that because that's what I have here. What was my feedback? Okay, so you have a set, but it doesn't do anything. You have a get, and it doesn't do anything. This should be return, this dot amount. Right, and this one just needs to be this dot amount equals amount. Right. Because otherwise it's not doing anything. You can call it, but it doesn't change the data.
I don't get it right here.
Yeah, that's a constructor, but you need to remove the word double. And it needs to be this amount, this dot amount equals X.
I don't get any public money. I have public money right here. It
You got
doesn't
that
do
one?
anything.
It doesn't have to do anything,
Yeah.
but this one, we would remove the word double, but it does have a parameter, double X. That word double there is not the return type, it's the parameter type. And so it needs to then say, this dot amount equals X. You have the declaration right if you remove the word double. Yeah, take that word out and then make it say this dot amount equals X, and you're good. Does that make sense?
It doesn't make sense in my, but it does make sense in this. Okay, what's X doing right here?
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna edit it to be correct, according to your UML. Like that.
So it doesn't mean that it doesn't like do anything when we do amount plus equal.
Sure, that's what deposit is supposed to do. It adds to the amount. So you got it right. That's totally correct. Right, because if you call deposit, you want the amount to go up. Yeah, and the same for remove. So yeah, you got that one exactly right. The only thing that we needed to add was this line. This line. That one. And remove the word double there because the constructor doesn't have a return type. Okay. I should have pulled up somebody's exam rather than the modified one. I apologize for that. That made it more confusing. Alrighty. Any others? I definitely have to correct Vincent's regrade there. How about others? My little explanations are so perfect that nobody has any questions?
Well, the ones I got wrong, I kind of deserve it.
Well, if you see why, that's fine. don't think I'm going to go through this one. If you have any questions about 54 and the correct way to print an array, it's very similar to the quiz question that we went over the day before the exam. The only difference is that it had the additional ones of using an index variable rather than just a for each loop. Something like that. Oh, one was using vals.length and one was using count. That was the only difference. So we added 2 more to choose from. So this is okay. It looks to me like that one's okay. Oh, don't do that. This one is not okay because X is not a counter. So we would not choose B. And these are probably in random order on y'all, so I shouldn't even be stepping through them. If there's no questions on it, I'm going to skip it. I mean, everybody made A's and B's, so the vast majority of y'all did. I mean, everybody did really well. That's not absolutely true, but real close to A's and B's. Please ask questions. I'm looking at this wanting to talk. You can just tell I'm itching to talk.
I like the memes. Again.
But why don't we just cover what?
I think we'll cover some new stuff. Yeah. All right, so 2 things I want to do today. One is to talk about the string list. Excuse me, the array list, which we've talked about before. And then I want to talk about using the NetBeans debugger. So I'm not going to even hit a PowerPoint to do that.
Funny looking exam, but looks like you took it away.
Pardon me?
I had one that said exam over chapters 4 and 5, but now it's.
Yeah, I did too. I thought.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It's gone now. You got to take that one too. Nope. So what is today? Today's day Z
It
already?
would be Z1. Last time you said Z0.
So we're on Z1? Okay.
Luckily, there are only a couple more lectures after this.
Yeah, Z2, Z3, or we could do ZA and ZB and Z's. Nah, we're not going to do that. Okay, so what a array list is just like an array, but it grows and shrinks. And that's what's cool about it, because when you declare an array, it's fixed in length. And if you want to expand the array, you have to redeclare it. You have to copy all the values from the old one into the new one. And if you watched all the videos that I linked, one of them discussed arrays versus lists. A list is a dynamic data structure, and there's lots of different ways of implementing a list depending upon how you want to optimize it. There's a data structure called a tree, which can implement a list. There are linked lists. This is like data structures courses, computer science 4-year college stuff. We don't really need to know what a linked list is in order to take advantage of it. Not that I don't mind lecturing about it. So I'm going to make an array list variable. And the way you do that is known as a template variable, meaning that we have to specify the type of data that it's acting upon. And I'm going to make an array list of strings. So array list, angle brace strings, in angle names, equals new, not boo, new array list. And then again the angle braces, and you can put the same type. You can put string there, but if you leave it out, it just assumes. So I'm not going to put anything between the angles. But it is a constructor, so we have to have both the angles and the parentheses. And then we have to go and add an import for it. So I'm going to let NetBeans add the import for it. java.util.ArrayList. All right, now I'm going to add a few names. Names dot, not array, names dot add. I had to go slowly because in Python it's dot append. I love teaching 2 different languages and 2 different classes. All right, names.add, John. Names.add Sam.
Bless you.
Names.add Terry. Now we can step through them. Easiest way to step through them is a for each loop. Or we could step through them with by index value. Let's do that one first, just because it's longer, and then I'll probably never do it that way again. For parentheses int I for my index counter equals 0. I is less than names.size. I wish it was length, just because that's what we use with strings and with arrays, but we didn't write the language, we don't get to pick. And then I++, of course. And so we're going to print that. System.out.println. I feel like doing something slightly different. I don't know why. I should not do anything slightly different. Forget it. System.out.println. That name. So names dot get parentheses I. If it was an array, we wouldn't use dot get. Instead, we would use the square brackets, right? But the syntax is very similar, just like dot get. Remember when we were doing strings, we used dot char at?
Bless you.
Same idea. Yeah, bless you. All right, so that's one way to do it. Let's use the for each loop. I think I'm going to take the braces out. I don't see a reason to have braces on that one. So, for, now what's the data type of our array list? It's string. So for every string s colon names, system.out.print s. System.out.println s. That'll print our name list twice. What if we want to remove something from the array list? Names dot remove. We can remove by index or we could remove by value. Let's remove by index and get rid of Sam. Poor Sam. Well, what's his index number?
1.
It's going to be 1, right? Because that's going to be 0 and that's going to be 1 and that's going to be 2. So we're going to remove that element. How about if we want to change? There is a set command. So I want to change the first element from John to Janet, or Jan. So names.set, parentheses 0, comma, Jan. And what about Terry? We know the name Terry, but we don't know where he is in the list by now. I'm too confused. So I'm going to do names.remove, parentheses, quote, Terry. In Python, you had 2 different syntaxes for removing by index and removing by value. In this one, you have the same syntax. You just depend upon overloading, right? If you pass it an int, it treats it as an index. If it's anything else other than an int, it treats it as a value. Now that kind of hints at something. And what it hints at is that you cannot have an array list of ints. Well, that's not fair. What if I need numbers? Instead, you use the wrapper class. You have an array list of integers. I'm just going to remove this for loop and paste it below all of those changes. Right, so I don't have to print them out yet a third time. All right, So Sam, Terry, and Jan. John, Sam, Terry, and Jan. Does that sound right? Yeah, because I deleted Terry. I need to put a print statement here so I don't confuse. System.out.println after changes. And those results are correct. Yeah, because we removed one element and then we removed Terry and all we were left with was Jan. Now I hope you see how much easier that is than doing the same stuff with arrays. So we see several different aspects. What is this? How to declare one, array list, and then between the angle braces we put our data type equals new array list, like that. And then we call .add to append. We call .set I, comma value to replace a value. We call .remove I. What did I do wrong here? I mean, if type was an actual data type, this still is not a correct statement.
You left out the name of the array.
I left out the name of the list, exactly. So I'm going to call it a list. And so alist.add, alist.set, alist.remove, remove by index, and alist.remove by value to remove by value. If I need a array list of ints, here's how I would do it. Array list, that won't work. I can't do that. You cannot use primitive data types with array lists. The way it juggles them around, they have to be references. So this has to be a class. Fortunately, we have a class that mimics the effect of an integer. So array list, capital I, integer. I'm just going to call it iList, or no, yeah, iList, good enough. Is equal to new array list, angles, parentheses. Same business. alist.add. Attend to it. iList.add a 20 to it. Now what if I want to insert something into the beginning of it? Well, the add method also is the insert method if you specify the index that you want your new piece of data to be at. So iList.add, I want this element to be the new index 0. So by the time I'm done, it's going to be 30, 10, 20, because he becomes the new one, the new first, and the rest of them are bumped down. And you can guess how you're going to delete this stuff, but unfortunately we have a little bit of a problem, don't we?
You only don't see the changes.
Yeah, what's kind of wrong here is, or where I'm building up to, is that these said that these were supposed to be integers, but instead we're passing ints in. What's happening is what's known as boxing. If the parameter type is integer, but you pass it an int, it creates an integer. It's the same thing as doing this. Now you would never see anybody write this, but it's the same thing. Add new integer 40, like that. The compiler substitutes the necessary code to create an integer. Now why do I say that? Because if I do this, iList.remove, and I tell it to remove, say instead of making that 40, say I make that a 2. The reason I'm doing that is because it would be ambiguous here. Am I removing by index or value? And the answer is I'm removing by index. How would I remove by value? Well, a question hadn't even occurred to me, but I think you would do it like this. Let's print it out and see if that's the case. Firstly, I'm just curious if I can print out the list like this. System, and I know the answer is no. But system.out.println iList. Is it that easy? It sure would be nice if it was. I'm strongly, oh, it was. Look at that. Otherwise, I'd have to use a for loop, right? So this did actually delete the 2. And if I wanted to delete the 30 or the 10 or the 20, I would have to do the same thing. Why did we have to go through this rigmarole? Because if you only have one parameter and it's an int, it always assumes it's an index. It's not going to kind of make up in its mind whether you're passing in an index or a value. That's kind of why I wish that there were 2 different keywords. But anyways. The same is true if you have an integer capital I and you need to treat it as an int, right? If you have some function that takes an int, but you have an integer instead, integer I is equal to new integer, parentheses 100, and we want to use that in something that takes an int, like POW, right? Double x is equal to math.pow 10 to the power of I. It gets unboxed automatically. I'm not totally sure how the compiler does that. But if you pass in a wrapper class, but the parameter that it's expecting is the primitive data type, it goes ahead and does the conversion on its own. If you didn't have that, then you would have to do something like this. I dot int value, like that. That's how you get the value out of the wrapper class I, or the wrapper object I. But do we ever do that? Not really, because of unboxing, the automatic conversion, the implicit conversion. The only time that the implicit conversions don't work, the only time I've ever seen it need to do that is when we're calling .remove, because there's a confusion between whether we're doing an index value or whether we're using index or value, delete by index or delete by value. All right, that's almost, I don't even know how to summarize that in the notes. I is unboxed to a primitive int. In the other examples, the values such as 10, 20, and 30 were boxed. Which means converted into integer objects, as shown in the next call. And then here I'm going to say in a prior call. Can't use boxing because the compiler doesn't know. The compiler would not know if 2 was an index, int, or a value. So we explicitly turn it into an integer. Takeaway: cannot use primitive data types. They all have to be classes. So if you're trying to use a primitive data type, you use the wrapper class, and usually it doesn't have any effect other than that, right? When I was calling .add, stuff like that, I didn't care. I wasn't having to using any funky syntax like that. Okay, now I want to talk about debugging. There are more things that we can talk about with array lists, like creating array lists of objects. Well, we already are creating array lists of objects because each one of these is an object behind the scenes. But specifically, like if we make a money class and we want to create an array list of money objects, we could do that. Well, let's do this. We're going to create a function. I think I'm going to make it a recursive function. No, I think that that would be making it a little bit too complex. Let's create for ourselves a static int sum, and then write a function that will add to that sum each time. Or maybe not even a function. I think I'll just make a for loop that adds to it. I'm going to initialize it to 0, although instance variables always get set to 0 anyways if you don't initialize them. So let's do this. For parentheses int x equals 0, x is less than 100, x plus plus, sum plus equals x. And then we're going to system.out.println x for whatever purposes. I just want one more line of code here after that. Now to use the debugger, to get the program to stop in the middle of our code, I need to set what's known as a breakpoint, which means I need to come over and click on the line number that I want the code to break on. Now break isn't a bad thing. It doesn't damage the code. What it means is it stops the execution of the program there, so that you can start doing things with it with the debugger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a breakpoint on this print statement here. And that means when the code gets to this point, it's going to stop. It won't actually have printed anything out. I will have to continue it in order to get it to print anything out. Now we have these debug options up here. Step into, blah, blah, blah. Really, there is debug project. That's what I would go for. Step into would work just as well. Under run, there's also debug project, isn't it? Okay, yeah, there's debug project under debug. There's run under run. The difference is that if you run it, it ignores the breakpoints. Right, so up here it printed out all those numbers. But
Let's test project under.
we did test one time. Do you remember when we created some test functions? We created some tests. What test does is, and we need to do that again as well. So I'm going to do debug project. It's going to run and it's going to stop at that point. All right. Big deal. Why is it stopped there? So that I can go and I can look at the variables and see what their values are. What if I want to know what sum is? And I want to be able to watch it go up. Well, I can move my cursor right over it and it'll show me that right now the sum is 0, which makes sense. We haven't added anything to it. Down here is our variable list. Well, I don't see sum there. Well, it's one of the static numbers. So if I click on static, expand that, then I see sum, and it currently equals 0. It's not letting me pull that down. All right. What if I want to start it up again? I can click the green button, and it's going to continue. But since it's in a loop, it's going to keep stopping there because it hits a breakpoint instantly. If we set a breakpoint on something that wasn't a loop, I'm going to remove that breakpoint for now, and then I'm going to click the continue button. It does the rest of it. Right, it ran the whole program because there weren't any further breakpoints. I'm going to put that back in there. I'm going to debug it again. It's going to stop at that point. Now what if I just wanted to execute one line and then stop again? That's called step over. There's an icon for that up here in the debug. I'm not seeing it. Oh, did I not actually start it? I guess that doesn't do a debug. No, that just runs it. That's the debug project icon. Sorry. Okay, so now I'm here. I wanted to execute one line of code. That's called a step over. Why step over? Because that's too different than step into. Step into goes into a function call. Well, I don't really want to watch it execute print line. I don't want to step inside the print line function. Might be interesting to see. Instead, I just want it to execute that line of code. So I'm going to do step over. And if I go and look on output, it did in fact print a 0. And then execution blipped back up to the for statement again. Right now, x is still equal to 0. But as soon as I hit step over, then x is going to be incremented to 1. We can see x listed here. So I'm going to click step over again. It's now on this line. We can tell it's on this line because of the little arrow. It has not added 1 to sum yet. It's getting ready to. That is our current line, but it hasn't done it yet. So I'm going to do step over. Now it has added x to sum. Well, what is x at this point? It's equal to 1. So what I want y'all to do is to keep debugging. And as soon as you see sum equal the value 55, I want you to tell me what x was at that point.
I can't do any of that.
All right, I'll come right over. So what I mean is keep doing stepping over and watch the value of sum. You can either hover your cursor over it or you can expand this to hit sum. And then keep watching sum. And I want you to tell me what the value of x is when sum equals 55. And could we edit the code to print them out to find out what x is? Yeah, but you don't always want to print the code.
No, when you get the screen.
Got to click on the 21. Now you got the breakpoint. So now click on debug project. Now it stops there, and you can do a step over to get it. Oh, one more over. Step over to get it to execute the next line. You can see what it's. That's where it is. Click step over again. That's where it is. It's about to add x to sum. Click step over again. It's about to print it. Step over again. Now it's back at the top of the for loop, so it can add x to it again. So we want to see what sum is, so we need to go look at our variables. Click on static because it's one of the static members. Click on the plus next to it, and we see sum. And keep clicking step over until you see sum hit 55. Anybody found it yet?
Yep.
There. Got it.
All right, I don't think you have a breakpoint yet. That could be what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint here. You can click on the line number like that. Boop. Also, you can right-click on it and do breakpoint enable, breakpoint disable. Okay, now it's ready to go. So I'm going to debug the project. Go ahead. Click debug project. You can use that icon and under the debug menu. It's stopped here. We want to see what our variables are. So I don't see my variables window. So click up on window. Debugging variables. Okay, and we don't see sum listed because it's a static member. So click on the plus sign. And there's sum. Right now, it only equals 0 because we just added 0 to it. So we're going to click step over now, which is that icon, which means execute one more line of code. And so now it's up at the for loop. X is still 0, but as soon as we execute it, x is going to change into 1. So step over again. Now x is 1, and it's about ready to execute this line, so it's going to add 1 to sum. So keep clicking step over. And I want you to tell me what x is when sum turns into 55. What was it?
It was 10.
Yep. That's because the summation of 10 is 55.
If we want to go to say, 435, why not? Alter or
Yeah. So I'm going to stop debugging. I'm just going to click finish debugging. What if I need to step into a method? I'm going to add a method here so that I can step into it. Or maybe I'm going to get really wacky and complex and make a new class. Class money. Sounds familiar. Double amount. We're going to create a constructor. So public money, parentheses, double amount, this dot amount equals amount. But for this purpose, I don't want to condense it as much as I usually do, so I'm going to go ahead and put everything on their own line just because that makes setting breakpoints easy. And now I'm going to do a deposit method. Public void deposit double x this dot amount plus equals x. Then I'm going to go back down in my main code in my driver, and I'm going to create a money object, and I'm going to call deposit a couple of times. Alright, so down here in main, money M equals new money, and I want to start off with $10. And then M dot deposit 20. And M dot deposit 30. So, say that I'm curious about what's going on here. I'm going to set a breakpoint on line 23. You can click on the number or you can right click on the number and you'll see some options. There's also a bookmark. I never use bookmarks, but you can. And then breakpoint. Toggle the breakpoint. That creates a breakpoint. I should have just clicked on the line number, right? That's the easy way to do it. So now run the debugger. It's going to stop at this point. I'm curious about my variables first, so I'm going to open this up, and I can see that we have a variable M here. It says, I got a value of 87. Well, that doesn't mean anything. But if I expand it, we can see what its amount is. And an amount was 10. And what is this option here? Tells us the type of it. Okay. All right. I want to watch what happens when, I wish once I made it larger I could make it small again. But I can't. Okay. Well, anyways, I'm sitting here on this line. I want to see what the deposit function does. Instead of using step over, I'm going to use step into, which is the downward pointing arrow. It's not this one, the bounce arrow. It's the go down arrow. Step into. And now we're inside the class. Can't really tell, but we are. We're inside the class, inside the deposit function, inside the deposit method. Now, if we want to leave this, since it's only one line of code, it's real easy to leave it. We just do step over, and we're going to wind up getting back out of it. But there's another way I want to show you of getting out of it too. So I did step over, it's hit the closing brace. If I click step over again, it bounces back to where we are. And now we're one line after the breakpoint. We'll step into it again with the down arrow. But let's say that there were 100 lines of code here, and I didn't want to step over each one in order to get out. That's what step out is for. So if I do step out, it's going to return out of the function. It's going to execute all the code, right? It's not going to just skip it, but it's going to run it until it leaves that function, that method. And so now we're at the first line after that. There are other things you can do with the debugger, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to show them off. Let's see. I'm going to go to Window, Debugging, and we'll see some other things. Call stack. Call stack is a good one. Tell you what, I'm going to remove all of these breakpoints. I'm going to set my breakpoint back down in the deposit function. I'm going to run the debugger. Oh, well, I'm going to stop the debugger, so I'm going to click the red square, and then I'm going to run it again. And it ran the debugger until the first time the deposit function of the money class was called. Sorry, too much Python. I need to be calling them methods. But anyways, I checked the call stack out. We're inside the money deposit method, which was called by main. And if deposit called another function, and we were sitting inside that, we'd see that in the call stack as well. So here we get a list of all of our breakpoints. Right now we only have one breakpoint because I deleted all of the others. Removed all the others. Go to source. I'm looking at the breakpoint list. If you don't see the breakpoint list, Window, Debugging, Breakpoints. You could right click on it and do go to source, and it'll take you to that breakpoint. Now that was already on screen, right? So, but what if it wasn't? Right click on it, new breakpoint. Alrighty. I've never done it this way. But you ought to be able to specify what class and what method, whether we're going to stop when it enters the method or whether it exits the method. That's interesting. You can make it stop the first time the deposit function is called and it exits. What is the action? We're going to break the thread, or we're going to break all threads. Well, we haven't talked about multi-threaded programming. You can have multiple threads of execution running at the exact same time, and you might want to stop them all, or you might just want to stop the current thread. Now, one that is really useful that I haven't used in this client is the watch window. Debugging watches. I should Google how to do it. NetBeans, watches, debugging. Maybe it's because I don't actually have it running. Right, I'm not actually debugging, am I? Well, here. I'm going to create a local variable inside this deposit function. Double y is equal to x times 2, just something stupid. And double z is equal to y times 2, just to have some stuff to do. Then I'm going to run the debugger, let it get to that point. I'm going to go to watches. Can I go to variable and create a watch from the variable list? Let's find out. I'm going to do a step over and a step over, so now I have a y value. It has done that. I'm going to right click on that variable, create fixed watch. It's not letting me do that. That's what I was expecting to be able to do, is create a watch from the variable list. We can watch any variable available to us at this moment. So, if that is right, we can go to watches, enter new variable, and say we want to print out the value of y. and y is equal to 40. Now we ought to be able to set a condition to make it stop the program when y equals 40. But I don't remember how to do that. But anyways, this stays so that if I stop debugging and then I run it again, my watch is still there. It's just saying y is not known at the current context. Why? Because it actually hasn't been created yet. I am on this line. I'm on the line above where y gets created. But if I do step over and then step over again so that that variable is actually created, then I will be able to see it in the watches.
Something's interesting. It doesn't tell me else.
There.
I'm going to date this.
Okay. You don't have a breakpoint set in your deposit function. Let's go and set a breakpoint in.
You're right.
Yeah, maybe there. I had it in mind on that line. Right, so now go ahead and run the debugger. Oh, looks like it is running. Let's stop it and run it again.
Oh, here we go.
Yep. So then hit step over and step over again.
Right here?
Yep. Do that twice so that now the Y variable is created.
Yeah.
And we need to open up our watches window. So window, debugging, watches.
Watching.
And we are curious about the variable y, so type in y there. There. And that's its value at that point. Because when you're looking at the variable list, you could have hundreds of thousands of variables listed here, right? Sometimes you only care about a very specific one. Now what I want to know how to do is to break when a watch variable hits a certain value.
Under debug, the third from the bottom says new watch. I'm just wondering if that's any use.
That may be. So what you need is to set up a conditional breakpoint. Select the breakpoints tab, add a new breakpoint, and then go back to the breakpoints tab, select breakpoints, blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, that's not doing what I was hoping for. So you are saying that if I go to watches, where at?
It was under debug, the debug drop-down list. And then third from the bottom says new watch.
I think that does the exact same thing as what I was doing there.
Oh,
Yeah. And that would add it to the watch list. Well, I don't see how to do it. I could Google it up. You are free to Google it up as well. I need to give y'all some homework over array lists. So our homework is going to be to revise one of our earlier assignments to use array lists rather than arrays. I should just leave it that vague, but let's go actually pick one, huh? Can I get in there? Man, it's been a long time since I gave y'all homework. I have been so lax.
Well,
All right, what I'm going to do is I want you to, let me pop this up. Is create an array list that contains all the values of sum from 0 to 99, if your code looks like that. That's giving you way too much, and making it way too easy. So write a loop that iterates from 1 to 100. Store in an array list that iterates x from 1 to 100. Store in an array list the value of 1 over x. When the loop is done, print them all. Also, then print the sum and the average of the elements in the array list. Now, have I shown you how to do the sum and the average? No, but you know how to do it with arrays. So you could just do a for each loop, right? Sum is equal to 0 for, every value in the array list. Sum plus equals x. This is not correct syntax, but you get the idea, right? We'll cover that again on Thursday, but you can certainly do all of this stuff based on what we already know. Okay, so that's a very short assignment based on that idea. Then there's going to be one more part.
Could you make it do some assignments?
Yeah, we'll do that. Write a program that will ask the user, 1, add a name, 2, remove a name, 3, display names. When the user selects 1, they are prompted for a name, and it is added to an array list called names. When the user selects 2, they are prompted for a name, and it is removed from the array list. When the user selects 3, it's going to print the array list. Okay, so there's one little thing to consider, though, before we can do this homework accurately, which is what if we try to remove a value that doesn't exist?
We will print.
An exception. Yep. So what happens if down here where I was adding and removing, what if I misspelled that? Theory. Oh, I thought it was going to crash. I thought that would generate an exception. But what if you wanted to see if that name was in the list? If, parentheses, names dot contains. So if names dot contains, I thought this is what we were going to have to do, but apparently it fails silently. I'm sure it returns a Boolean value of some kind to indicate whether it exists or not. So anyways, I'm going to move this to our notes page. If a list dot contains value, then you could do something with it. And I thought that you were going to have to do that before you could do remove a name. I thought it was going to generate an exception if you tried to remove a name that was not already in the list, but that's not true. Okay, so those are our 2 homework assignments. Now we'll create separate Dropbox for them. All right, are there any questions? We'll talk more about array lists. One of us needs to figure out how to make the program stop when a variable hits a certain value. Hopefully I will. Feel free to Google that yourself. See if you can beat me to the knowledge. No questions? We all done? Let's make a Dropbox.